That is right. We are live again. It is Thursday, so that must mean it is the Art of Advocacy time. That's right. I'm your host, Dr. Sheldon L. Akins. I'm excited to be here today. I got a good friend of mine is on. They're in the back room right now. We are going to be talking about social emotional learning. I hope I didn't trigger anybody just from saying it. Oh my God, 2022 has been a year. I'll tell you one thing. Always remember, this show is sponsored by Leading Equity, becoming an advocate for all students. By the way, speaking of all students, January is going down. Now, if you're familiar with the show, you're familiar with Leading Equity podcast, you know every single year we do a virtual summit. Well, I got something different this year. It's going to be happening in January. It won't be a virtual summit, but it will be well, I'm not even going to tell you. You got to just more details to come. I got excited, got ahead of myself. Just stay in touch. You'll find out what we're all about. We got something very special happening in January. Trust me, you do not want to miss what I got planned or what I'm planning for you. All right, now, it's enough fluff for now. If you're out there, by the way, feel free to say hello. Feel free to utilize the chat. By the way, subscribe to the show. We are in the process of trying to build the show up. So please subscribe to the show, share it with your friends, share it with your network, hit that like button, hit that, what else do they say? Hit the buzzer, the bell so that you're notified every time we go live, okay? We go live every week. Now, today's special guest is Dr. Krista Leh. She's the founder of Resonance Educational Consulting, which supports educators in building meaningful, engaging, and sustainable cultures that enhance social emotional learning and promote diversity, equity, and inclusion. My favorite topics. I want to bring her on right now. So without further ado, I'm looking for the sound effects. That'll be too much at one time. Welcome, Krista. Glad to have you on the show.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here. Wow, I feel really special with the applause. And I have to tell you, you left me hanging. I was with you on January. I'm like, oh, what's happening? Man.
A cliffhanger. You have to stay tuned. I'm excited for it. This is going to be a big deal. You know, I get a lot of requests for certain things. And then when I start getting more and more of the same requests, it's like, okay, maybe I need to put something together. Yes. So that's kind of where we're at right now. So I won't say what it is, but I'm excited for it.
That's one of the things I love the most about the work that you do is that you're so responsive and you have the pulse of what people need in the moment. So if you haven't subscribed to Sheldon's newsletter or signed up for the work so that you can be in the groups, the collaborative, and get the book.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Nice little plug there. And by the way, folks, down at the bottom of your screen, if you want to learn more about Krista's work, is right there. The website is there, resonanceed.com. Feel free to check out the work that she's doing as well. So, Krista, I just read a sentence of your bio of who you are, but I would love for you to share with our audience a little bit about yourself and what you currently do.
Sure, I'd love to. I am a former high school social studies teacher, so 10 years in the classroom, loved it, never thought I'd want to do anything else, but I had an opportunity to become an instructional tech coach, so I figured, you know what, I've spent too much of my life being comfortable, and I need to grow a little bit. I need to stretch myself, so I became a tech coach for the district. Then I moved into curriculum and supported 36 different data teams. But I always knew that I was incredibly passionate about social emotional learning and supporting the students. And so I was a coordinator for the SAP team, which helps students who are experiencing barriers to learning. And we had a huge spike one year. And so that led me to look into student leadership and to really dig into social emotional learning and the 5 competencies from CASEL. For the last 10 years, I have been working around the country to support educators as they create systems and cultures that embed social emotional learning into everything we say, we think, and we do.
Well, great. So you're the right person to talk today because I'm excited for the topic when it comes to social emotional learning. Now, I don't claim to be a social... First of all, I don't claim to be an equity expert. I just feel like there's just too much out there to know, but I definitely don't consider myself a social emotional learning expert either. I can do trainings, I can do support, but it's not necessarily my niche. I would reach out to you or my buddy George or somebody else that does SEL work if I really needed, if I was in a pinch. So let's start with those competencies. There's five.
Correct.
Could you break those down, and then we'll move into some of the changes that CASEL has done over the last couple years or so?
Would love to. And so there are lots of different frameworks out there, but I really think that Castle's is one of the older ones and one of the more researched. And so they have five competencies. The first two are your intrapersonal competencies, so self awareness and self management. And then the next two are your interpersonal competencies, so social awareness and relationship skills. And then the fifth one, to me, really brings them all together, and that's responsible decision making.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Now, this was the initial, and I know there's been a history because I remember doing a research paper on SEL strategies with my buddy David Adams, and
Amazing.
that's my guy, right? I love David. Shout out to David if he's watching. But we did a research paper together, so I learned a little bit about how CASEL was formed and then how it kind of where it's at now. But they did some equity changes recently, and can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I got so excited about it when that happened. And so the change really happened in October of 2020, which was incredibly timely, right? With everything going on in 2020. And I really do believe that the diversity, equity, inclusion pieces were already there. They just weren't explicit enough, at least for me. And I think to really set a solid foundation for what skills students and adults need to be successful in life. And so a couple of the ones that I'd like to highlight, and I love talking about this. So it's in self-awareness, it's really understanding your social, your cultural, and your linguistic identity. And then part of that is also what are those assets because of your culture and your background that are going to help you be successful in life. One of the pieces that people get tripped up on, I find, is that there is a section that talks about understanding your biases and prejudices. And I know I was one of those people that 10 years ago, I'm like, I'm a good person. I'm not biased. I'm not prejudiced. And the thing is that we're all socialized to have preferences from very early on. And so when we have those thoughts that jump into our head, it's just questioning them and really pulling them apart a little bit. Like, I love chunky peanut butter more than I like creamy peanut butter. That's a preference, a bias that I have. And so let's just be really explicit and think about those because they are behaviors that can be changed. And if we don't recognize them, they do get manifested into our behaviors and how we view the world and how we interact with the world. Some of the other changes that really took place is if we look under social awareness, there's a piece that talks about understanding social context and that oftentimes we might behave in a way that is not indicative of our own personality or our core values, but that there's something happening socially that is driving our behaviors. So for instance, I had a student when I was in school who on Friday got caught stealing food from the cafeteria. And some of the teachers were like, he's stealing, there's consequences for this. But if we back up a little bit, and as Walt Whitman said in the Ted Lasso show, in the dartboard scene, be curious, not judgmental. And what we found is that the student was taking care of siblings at home and there wasn't food on the weekends. And so he wasn't a thief. It wasn't like somebody who was trying to steal lipstick, I say, for the thrill of trying to get away with something, but he was looking to survive. And so that was part of the social context that was driving his behaviors. Some of the other pieces is identifying diverse norms in different settings and recognizing what is just and unjust. When we're looking at relationship skills, it's how do we advocate and stand up for the rights of other people? And then under responsible decision making, for me, they really focus on being open-minded and hearing other people's perspectives and then making decisions that are not only caring and responsible, but ethical, and how they align with your individual core values, but how do they impact the community as well? The one that I skipped over was under self-management and being able to balance your own personal needs with the good of the community.
Okay. Yeah, I was perusing, and I wanted to see this directly from Castle's website here, and they have a whole area in regards to equity and how, in what ways does SEL advance equity and excellence And I agree with what you said. I mean, I think I already felt like SEL had, the competencies were already had equity embedded, but I also think that it is important to spell out some things, and so I am glad that they revisited. Now it's unfortunate that I think as a result of them being more explicit with their language when it came to equity, that SEL is under fire a lot and just kind of lumped into the whole umbrella of critical race theory nonsense. So I'm just curious, what are what are some of the challenges maybe that you're seeing when it comes to the SEL work these days?
There definitely have been challenges, and it's anywhere from my home state of Pennsylvania to working in Florida, in Georgia, in Illinois. Like, it's everywhere. There's really a misunderstanding of what SEL is. And I think part of it, I feel, is because we changed it into an acronym.
Mm,
And so when we really look at social emotional learning, it's a set of skills that's going to help us be successful in life. And we're not pushing a set of values, we're pushing an understanding of who you are and how you show up in the world and how to be your best self, and then how to interact with other people so that you can accomplish goals, so that you can make the world a better place. Um, and so I've actually had people say, well, you can't use SEL in the titles or in descriptions, or even say SEL when you come in. So we've called it social, emotional, academic skills. Those were okay. Um, just calling them life skills also works. I've been told when we've done diversity work that I couldn't say the word privilege, but I could use barriers and benefits. And so I will be honest, it's not the educators or the administrators or even the students who are putting these constraints. It's, from the most part, coming from school board members and community members who are hearing misconceptions and myths around what SEL is, and they're thinking that they're trusted resources
mm.
and not even being open to listening to what it is that we do and how we are co-creating what this looks like, sounds like, and feels like with families, with students, with communities.
Absolutely. I got a comment that just came in. It says, "Yeah, the language matters."
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
uh, it- I've been in situations where I've been asked to change content. I've changed titles, but I've always kept my content the same. Just because I just feel like it's gonna go against it. Either it's gonna water down things, and my thought is, well, why am I here? If you're serious about doing this work, then why are we trying to change things up and all? I'm like, maybe you're not ready, maybe you need a little time, but I tend, like, I have changed titles, but I just can't change the content itself. I struggle with that.
This is a really great question, and actually one that a group of friends and I were just talking about a couple days ago. So I think Craig Martin and
Yeah,
JT Taylor and Basil Marin and
yeah,
Jen
yeah.
Orr, Shantae Garrett, and um, Chris. Sorry, Chris, I'm not remembering your last name. But we were talking about that, and
Mhm.
I'm okay with changing the words, but not the content, not the essence of what we're doing. And I still do work with students at the high school level, and they need this. They're asking for it. They
Mhm.
understand social emotional learning. They want to understand how to better relate to each other. And so they're asking for this
Yeah.
because they
Yeah.
know it'll help them.
Yeah, I love working with students as well. That's fun because my thing has always been, I could do PDs with adults all day. Doesn't mean that the students' experiences are going to change. You
True.
know, if I teach a teacher how to do how to be culture responsive teaching or discipline, whatever, does not necessarily mean it's going to change a child's experience. So, what happens when you are dealing with issues as a student and there isn't an adult around, or there is that snitches get stitches culture where students just aren't just going to go tell, those type of situations. So, how do I handle this myself? And so that's why I love working with students to learn more on how I can support them when they're on their own time.
I think you're right on with that, because that's ultimately why we got into education, was to support students so they could be their best selves and have
Mhm.
success however they define that out in the world.
Absolutely, absolutely. Let's see. There's another comment. There's some comments coming in. Let's see. The content is your why, but how you package the message can isolate or pull people in. And then they followed up with the content of your message that connects to your why. And I like that comment. Thank you for the comment, by the way. I want to touch on it just for a second, because I will say this: whenever I do trainings, I always say that this is a brave space. I want to create an environment in which you can feel comfortable or confident to ask questions, to share your truth, to engage. I don't do trainings that are meant to make people feel bad or guilty or hate America, whatever thoughts people think our DAI trainings are about. That's just not the type of trainings I do.
And I love that you said that too, because it reminds me of what you said earlier with like, I'm not an expert. And I know sometimes people will say, oh, Krista's the expert in SEL.
Yeah.
And I'm not. I'm not. I'm just somebody who wants to learn as much as I can about it and work with other people to develop best practices. And so I feel like when you say you're an expert, that means you know everything there is. And I'm continually learning. And so part of that, I think, engaging in work around SEL and diversity, equity, and inclusion is also understanding that we're going to make missteps as well. And I still do it. And it's, you go through this embarrassing moment and stuff and okay, what can I do to fix this? But I think part of that safe and brave space, and I had a really good dialogue with a local high school around that, is that for me, safe is that I need everybody to be physically safe. And I want to create an environment to the best of my ability where we're psychologically safe, emotionally safe. And then the brave space is that we can have those hard conversations, and we can make a misstep because we're learning, but we understand that we're here together learning. And so I'm willing to engage and admit where I mess up and hear feedback from other people and make adjustments based on that. And I think that's a huge part of SEL and DEI work.
Yeah. And again, SEL isn't just for kids, for adults too, for human beings. Bottom line. So great point. Okay, let's get into let's talk about SEL, because you mentioned that there are several frameworks. Do you have your own? Is there a Dr. Leh framework that you utilize, or tell us about kind of how that looks for you?
Wow. I love that you asked me this. So thank you. I'm working on two different sides. So
Okay.
the first piece that we noticed is that there was a lot of surveys and support out there that could help find out what supports your students needed in terms of social emotional learning. Like, you could get so many different surveys to find out what level in the 5 competencies your students are at or your staff are at. However, there was nothing about the implementation. Like, what do you need to do to get those outcomes? And so a colleague and I, Dr. Linda Megger, about 5 years ago, created an SEL Implementation Audit. So we did a tremendous amount of research, and we worked on developing a survey where we triangulate the data. And we found that there were 3 factors that helped create what we say are scalable and sustainable social emotional learning cultures or systems. And if we want those outcomes where our students are growing in those competencies and our staff, what are the inputs that we're using to get there? And so if you go to the website, there is a resources section, and you can download the 3 factors checklist. We have some infographics there, but ultimately what we do is we collect the data from the school districts, and we do a district-wide survey, and then we do building-wide surveys and reports that let them know where they're at in a cultural frame, the structural frame, and the behavioral frame. And so there's indicators in each one, and then we let people know how far along the learning continuum they are, the levels of implementation. And we personalize all of the professional learning based on those individual reports and conversations with the teachers and the staff, and the administrators. So you can download, there you go. If you go up to the top right, you'll see the resources button. I love this feature. This is awesome. Thank you.
You got to get your StreamYard.
I do. So there's the 3 factors, the second one in the middle there.
Okay. So just put your name and email, and we can download that.
Yep. So I can keep going on there. So what we have found is just a couple points to help people out, is that it's very easy to move into the structural piece. Like, we're going to change the schedule and give 30 minutes for advocacy or morning meeting. And the cultural piece is really what we need. Like, do you have an SEL core team? Are you developing a common language where people get to share, this is what that word means and how are we going to operationalize that? There's also a free resource on establishing that language as well there for you. And also the piece that people often miss is, what are my roles and responsibilities in this implementation, in this integration? And what are our expectations for how we're going to treat each other socially? And then once we get that cultural piece set, we move into the structural side.
Okay.
And that's really about how are we infusing it into our social interactions, into our physical environment, into our instructional practices, and into the curriculum, so that we're trying to make people understand that SEL is not a program. It's who you are and what you do every day, from your modeling to your talking to the practices that you use.
Give me some examples of that, because I mean, I've had these conversations. What is instructional practice, SEL instructional practice? Give me some examples.
And I'm actually working on one right now. So there's a great resource that is instructional practices that promote SEL and equity. And the first couple pieces are talking about creating an affirming learning environment. I think it's from AIR, AIR, American Institute of Research. And then there are some practices where it talks about cooperative learning and group discussion and high expectations and rigor. And we say, well, yes, we know this, but how often do we really break it down for students and say, in this group discussion, here are the SEL skills we're going to be working on, and let's talk about what that looks like, sounds like, and feels like. And for the teacher, what do they need to do before the group discussion to really infuse SEL explicitly? What can they be doing during the instruction, like noticing what students are not speaking and what students are speaking, and are people's identities being respected, and are they advocating to the best of their ability based on the assets and what they're bringing to the table and to that group discussion? And then the after part, how are we reflecting on not only the content that we discovered or the content goals, but also how we collaborated, how we listened, how we communicated, how we problem solved, how we heard somebody else's perspective and maybe grappled with that a little bit to see how it fits in with our worldview.
I like this. Now, the other piece, and shout out to Dwight Carter. Thank you for your compliment. Not your compliment, your comment. He says SEL is not a program. Yeah, definitely, definitely.
Thank you.
Shout out to Dwight. He'll be on. I interviewed him not too long ago, so we got his episode coming up soon. But I like the sustainability piece, because I mean, how many times we see new administrators coming in with their latest and greatest evidence-based practices that comes in, and then as a result, 2 or 3 years or 4 years or even 10 years of work from the predecessor is dismantled, and it's something else comes along. So tell me a little bit more, when we're thinking about leadership changes, how this can still be sustainable even if you have a new administration coming in.
Yes, thank you. So that goes back to that cultural factor, that it can't be led by one person. We need a core team that is representative across the district. And so every district can look different. And the districts that I work with organize their core teams differently. So some, there's one core team for the whole district.
Okay.
Some, we have a core team for each of the buildings. For some, there's just a secondary and an elementary core team. I know in some of the larger districts, like county schools, they had vertical core teams. And then they also had core teams for each of the buildings. So it depends on the size that you have of the district and the number of the buildings. But what we're really looking for is, how do we get some consistency from K to 12? Because sometimes we have students who are coming from multiple elementary buildings into one middle school where maybe the language is different and the expectations are different. And I do understand that when you're looking at social emotional learning, the skills generally are the same across K through 12, or I should say the themes are the same, but the skills are going to deepen in complexity as you go from K to 12. And it's also going to move from who am I as a kindergartner where the world revolves around me to by the time I'm a senior, how do I interact with the world around me and how we're all connected to each other? Um, and so I know I'm kind of going off on this piece here because I wanted to share that the second piece we're working on is a K to 12 social emotional learning objectives with success criteria and essential questions.
I never thought about that, Krista, but that makes so much sense. If I'm doing SEL, if I'm a school, let's say I'm elementary school, and I hire you, for example, I bring you in, and it's just we're doing this language. This is what we're doing at our school. But the middle school brings in someone else, or they're working on a different frame. It's still SEL, but they're working with a different framework. And in high school as well, so you got three different. Everybody's an SEL school, but there's three different strategies. Is there not? Is that not? Is that common? Is that something that you've been seeing? Because I'd
It
never
is.
thought about that.
It is. And so there's a district I'm working with right now where the elementary schools are using Leader in Me, and the high schools have been working in restorative practice, which to me, they're all part of SEL. And
Right.
if you look at the Castle research from 2017, and then I think they did it again in 2021, there isn't any one program that addresses all five competencies equitably. And so what we have found is that so many of the schools really focus on self-management and relationship skills and responsible decision-making, but some of the pieces that we're really missing are around self-awareness and social awareness. And we want to leverage what is going well in the district. So I'm an advocate of, if you have a program that's working for you, keep that, but let's enhance it and maybe fill in some of the pieces around the skill sets that are not there yet. And as we do that, let's see what is consistent across the elementary to the middle to the high schools. And is there any way that we can smooth that road out a little bit? Because different schools and students might have different needs. And so one set program might not work best, or one set of strategies. And then when you take into account that we are human beings as well that are learning and growing, the way that I infuse SEL as a former social studies teacher and what's authentic to me might not work for maybe a tech ed teacher who is working in woodshop with students. And so I do believe that if we all work together, we can do something that creates that really strong support system for students, but is authentic to who we are and meets the students' needs.
Absolutely. Okay, we got some comments coming in. Shout out to Justin Thomas. This topic has similar concerns that mental health has with public misconception. We all need to know more about SEL and mental health because it is a part of all our collective health as a society. What are your thoughts, Krista?
I agree 100% because, and one of the districts I'm working with, people were saying, well, how does this all fit together? Do we look at mental health and SEL as a part of that?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that SEL is good for all of us when we're healthy and when we're not feeling healthy. It's just skills that we need for life. And so oftentimes it's, well, we have a student who's dysregulated. What do we do? Well, what about the students who are still learning and growing? How can we keep extending their skill set? So it's, I think, proactive, preventative, and it's responsive when we infuse it.
Yep. Dwight says, what do you recommend schools do to dive deep into all 5 SEL competencies?
Take a look at our SEL learning objectives when we have them come out. Actually, let me be serious. Actually, we've been creating them for a year now, and they've been reviewed by several different groups of educators from across the country, but they're still going to be in draft form because we want to get people's input to make them better and to refine them. I learned that from my friend, Dr. Scott McLeod, leaving something open to get feedback. But what I would say to that question, which was a great question, is let's look at those SEL competencies. Let's look at the skills that Castle's put out, and let's highlight the ones that we know we already do. So do we have a program that addresses some of those skill sets? Awesome. Are we doing that with fidelity across the board? Because our audit has also helped find that sometimes we say, yes, we're doing that, but there's no follow through to check in. And the teachers are saying, yeah, we're doing that. And then they shut the door and they're doing something else. So how do we really ensure that things are being monitored and that we're getting the outcomes that we want? So first, I would say, look at what's already going well and keep doing that. And then let's look at areas that perhaps are not being addressed in any of the content areas by any of the staff members. And let's see where there's a natural fit into content and into curriculum, and look at the curriculum standards and see where SEL is already embedded there. And I've worked with several groups across the country to start doing this curriculum work so that it's a natural fit. It's not one more thing. I will say it takes years. So we want to establish an awareness of what SEL is and feel really confident and competent in our own growth and in modeling that for students. And then how we react and respond and interact with students. So now we're looking at the social interactions. And then really being explicit about it with our instructional practices. Like I mentioned, the group discussion. I have 3 boys, all teen. Well, my one just turned 21, so I can't say he's a teenager anymore. But when he was in 8th grade, he's like, my math teacher doesn't teach. And I'm like, tell me more about this. And he said, all she does is put us into groups and give us math to work on, and she walks around the room all day. Well, I know you and your friends, you all think you're right. She's giving you an opportunity to negotiate, to communicate with each other, to collaborate, to problem solve. And if you got stuck, she would help you, right? And he's like, well, yeah. I said, so she just didn't tell you that you've been working on these SEL skills. And so we really need to make it explicit for our students so that they can start to notice it in the world around them.
Absolutely. Okay. I got one more question, and I saw a comment that came in, and I want to touch on that one as well. But when we're thinking about, because Justin, I think his comment about mental health was really important. So I just want to know, how does trauma-informed care relate
Yes.
to social emotional learning?
Yeah. So there are 6 principles around trauma-informed care. And we look at those when we're looking at social emotional learning. A lot of them have to do with understanding students, who they are, where they're coming from, their stories, their identities, their assets. It's about helping them build a sense of agency, that they have control in their life, in the classroom, that they get to make decisions and that their emotions are validated. It's about giving them choice and allowing them to have some direction with where they're going. I'll be honest, my mind blanked out, but I know I have an image with all 6 of the different pieces. And I think oftentimes I look at these pieces and I say, this is just good teaching and learning. This is what we need to do. It's just how we should be interacting with all of our students, regardless of if they've had significant trauma or maybe, I don't think there's any such thing as like minimal trauma. It is what it is, but it's all about how we're working and relating with our students and helping them grow in those competencies and showing that we care about who they are, that they're important, that their identities are valid and important, and that they can show up as their whole selves and how they're feeling on any given day, and that they're welcomed in an important part of that community.
Yep. I was trying to find something, but I don't think I found what you were, because you said there were 6.
Yes, I found 6.
I found this here. I'm gonna pull it up here, and you tell me if this is the one you're. How is it? There you go. Okay, so there's key trauma-informed SEL practices: create predictable routines, build strong and supportive relationships, empower students' agency, support the development of self-regulation skills, and then provide opportunities to explore individual and community identities. Was that you?
Close to it. I actually just Googled and found the one I was thinking of.
Okay.
It talks about safety, so emotional and physical safety, trustworthiness and transparency. And I think a lot of that has to do with the routines that you're saying, setting up the routines. Peer support, which for me is social emotional learning in how are we creating connected communities of learners so students can access their higher order thinking skills because they're regulated in their limbic system and in their reptilian brain. Collaboration and mutuality, empowerment, voice, and choice, and then cultural, historical, and gender issues. So again, their authentic selves. So
Got you.
thank you for letting me look that up. I'm like, oh, I know it's there.
That's how we do on live streams. Okay.
Perfect.
Megan has a really cool question, so I want to get your thoughts. Is it difficult to implement these if you don't have parental or guardian buy-in?
So I think that's a really great question, Megan. And I've worked in districts where there were different cultures who had differing viewpoints on interactions between students and children and adults, and also identity, right? So I've worked in a culture where it was part of the culture that they wanted students to behave a certain way because and as the principal had said, we were going to shame them if they did this behavior. And for me, shame is not a part of my culture. I want people to want to make a decision because they see the benefits of that and not because they're going to be shamed in a certain way. But in talking to the teachers, they said that this is a longstanding piece of the culture. And thinking about a growth mindset also is not part of the culture. It's, you're not good at this, you're not going to do it. And so it's trying to develop an understanding of how we can help students be successful, but also being respectful and understanding the deep cultural and historical ties that sometimes come with different groups, whether it's religion or race, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, language. One of the others is working with a particular group where they didn't talk about feelings. It was not as important to do that as it was about the performance and the academics. And so helping people understand that your academic scores in this district might be scoring or like soaring off the charts. However, when you look at the state health data, you have an extremely high number of students who are reporting that they have thought about taking their own lives. And the suicide ideation hotline is ringing off the hook every night. And so are we okay with that? We might have academics, but if we're not addressing those social emotional needs, our students aren't going to be able to perform at those levels or be healthy when they're performing at high levels.
Yeah, definitely. Dwight says, this confirms why solid classroom management protocols are crucial for SEL development. Megan says, sometimes it seems so vast, it can be overwhelming.
Yeah. And so I think when I think about classroom management, to me, it's about relationships. And I've really been digging into fabulous research from the developmental relationships from the Search Institute in Minneapolis. It's search-institute.org. And they have research from students saying, this is what I need from you. So there's 5 different characteristics, but then those characteristics get reordered. So the first is get to know who I am. And they said, this is what you need to do. Trust me, listen to me, let me speak. And then it's into how do we, build mutual trust. And
it's
then
crazy that you had to have a list to say, just trust me. What did you say? Say those again. It just seemed like basic stuff.
Yeah, listen to me. As we get deeper, it's, share power with me, like let me lead and step back as a teacher, expand my possibilities, connect me to new people and ideas and perhaps even occupations I had never thought about before. And this kind of goes back to that establishing the common language, because I had a teacher just a couple weeks ago, high school teacher, say, well, we know trust is the most important piece for a healthy relationship, but I don't have time to talk about trust. I'm like, well, then how do you know what your students need from you so that they can trust you, and how to demonstrate trustworthiness in the classroom? If we don't talk about this, we're just making assumptions about what the other person needs. And then the part about it being so vast, I agree. And what I start off with is little pieces. And so first I started off with, let me just understand there are 5 SEL competencies. And I put a sticky note on my computer. And every time I opened up my computer, I'm like, what are those 5 competencies? And then I would just focus on social or like self-awareness, and then just focus on self-management and do little bits at a time. We can't do everything, but we have to do something.
Yeah.
We have to do something. And when we all work collectively, so when Sheldon, you work to your best authentic self and your social emotional learning strengths, I work to mine, and we do it explicitly. We know we're supporting students. We don't have to do everything, but we have to do something.
Something. Okay. First of all, let me give you a hand clap. You're bringing the fire today, bringing the fire as always. I mean, I always like it when we get a chance to chop it up because you always bring the fire, the heat. So I just want to take a second for that. Now, here's the thing I want to ask you, because we're talking primarily to schools that have some sort of SEL framework, or this is the idea. But I'm thinking about my schools that do not have an SEL. If I'm just a solo teacher and I'm wanting to be more SEL-ish with my curriculum and instruction, are there some maybe common languages? Because I've heard that a few times, common languages, or maybe some other tips that you could maybe give to teachers or schools who aren't necessarily SEL identified schools, but there's some things that you think would benefit them as well.
Absolutely. And we've been working on putting those out on the resources page again. But I think it's take advantage of those teachable moments. I would say that SEL is everywhere around you. It's in your physical environment. So when you walk into your classroom, do you see your students, or do your students see themselves represented? Is their work displayed? How are the seats arranged? Are they able to collaborate? But do they also have an opportunity to reflect and to pull back and to do some self-work? Or maybe they need a moment to regulate themselves. And do they know that there are tools available for them in the classroom that they can use? Also, then look at the curriculum. Do the students get to see themselves in there? Do you know about all of your students beyond what their grade is, or maybe what their name is? I used to teach 6 classes, and so I would have up to 150 students every day coming through my room. And so every Wednesday, I would look through my list and think, who did I not talk with, or, have a direct conversation with, or answer a question, or ask them how they were doing. And I made sure on Thursdays and Fridays that I was able to go up and have that piece, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. I didn't want any of my students to come through my room in that week and be like, she didn't even notice I was here. And so then I would also say, talk to your students about like the trust and responsibility, and what is culture to them? What do they need to feel trust from you? Accountability is another big key word. So I think about what's important for you in your classroom. We do have a worksheet up there that you can use with students for them to debrief and think about what it means for them, what they need from the teacher in order to feel and to grow in that skill set. And then what can they do to demonstrate that they're growing in that skill set in the classroom, in the school? Starts a mentor of mine, Pete Grandy, says, think big, but start small. And so even if you don't have a system or a culture around you that is supportive, you can make those changes with explicit conversation with your students, listening to them, modeling for them those 5 SEL competencies.
Yeah. I would, and I second all of that. Go to Castle website, start there. Do, like you said, peruse, learn those 5 competencies. See how you can implement, if you can't get them all in, but at least focus on 1 or 2 for the year, just getting started,
Absolutely. And build. And you know what, too? I've worked in schools where teachers have put the 5 competencies up on the wall. And as they talk about a skill, they put it up. And so working in Bethlehem School District, Freedom High School, one of the teachers had this. And every time they talked about a new skill, they put it up on the board. And the students started using that language. So it's not something that we need to facilitate, but the hope is that over time, this gets co-created with the students.
Now, I have seen, I want to get your thoughts on this, because I've heard mixed reviews on, it's called the Peace Corner. So maybe you see this at an elementary level. It's like I call it a glorified timeout. It's one of those things where it's like it's set up in a room. Rather than the kid getting removed from the classroom and losing classroom instructional time, there's a space for a student to take a break, or whatever you want to call it. what are your thoughts on those areas, the designated areas for those timeouts or break times, if you will?
Yeah. Personally, I really like them because I think it allows students to advocate for what they need in a safe way before things start to escalate. My niece has one up in her room. She has a little tent that when
Uh-huh.
we go over and she's having a bad day, she's like, I'm going up to my room, and she kind of closes in and she's got a book and some stuffies. She calls them stuffies up there. And I can go up and talk with her and ask her how she's doing. And we've had conversations in this little tent. Um, but I think that these are things that we need to spend time talking to students about early on in the year so that they know what's available to them, so that they get an opportunity to say, if I am dysregulated and I'm angry, what are some things that can calm me down? Or if I'm feeling sad and unmotivated, what can I do to bring myself back up to speed again? The other thing that I've learned, and this is through talking with other educators, is that students need to understand that this is for a certain amount of time. This isn't a, I'm going to go sit here for 45 minutes, that there is a process that's in place where they go over, they find what they need, they set the timer, they participate in the activities that are there that work for them, and then they rejoin the group again when that timer is up. Um, for a high school, I'm like, what can we do? Because my room didn't have enough space for that.
Mhm.
And a school district out in Pennsylvania showed me that, I'll have to send it later, but there's a website that has all of these strategies. You could go to a zoo and watch animals online, or you could go do an online coloring. And I think it had maybe 12 different strategies for calming yourself down that students could do at their own desk for a couple moments without having to get up and to move to a back of a room or to another space. Um, and I'll be honest, in my experience working with high school students, if I've explained to them, like, here's our process, here's what we're going to do, I very rarely have ever had students take advantage of that. Um, and so I think if we come into it with an understanding that we're trusting our students to do what's best for them and we give them the space to be able to do that, they're going to live up to the high expectations that we set for them.
Mm. Yeah, at the end of the day, it goes back to the relationships conversation, right? It's if our kids respect you and they won't want to let you down. Like so you set those norms, and not you setting them yourself, but you're as a classroom,
Yes.
you're setting these norms, and you get that respect, you develop that rapport, and then now you have opportunities for kids who are really going to do their best for your classroom. I mean, I don't know how many times I've talked to teachers that'll tell me, this child seems to have trouble in everybody else's classroom, but when they come to my classroom, I don't know what it is. I don't have any issues. And I say it's because of the relationships that you have with them.
I
Bottom
agree.
line.
And one of the things that I've been thinking about specifically is we have to be intentional about creating those
Yeah.
relationships because there is not enough time in the day for that to happen on its own. So we need to think about who we're talking to, the questions that we're designing, the way that we're organizing our classroom and instructional strategies that maybe when they're working in groups or they're working independently, we go around and we're having conversations with kids and checking in instead of sitting up in the front of the room grading papers.
Mm.
But we have to take control of that part. And one other piece I was just thinking about when you were talking about the regulation, I know there was a time where I had a class early on in my years that I was so frustrated with, and my next class came in, like, 4 minutes later. I needed a chance. I
Yeah.
needed a timeout and quiet. And I looked at the class and I was honest with them and I said, I need a couple minutes to calm myself down. I'm feeling a way that you don't deserve because you just came in here and I want to give you my best self. And at the moment, you're not going to get the best me. So if you could just pull out a book and read or quietly talk, I just need like 4 minutes to kind of work on myself and get me ready to be my best self for you. And so I have a hard time understanding why we don't do that for children, the same things that we know we need and that we would do for ourselves.
Seems like a no-brainer, but it's just not a thing that we all do. And I mean, we're human at the end of the day.
Yeah.
We're human beings. And so no one's perfect. And I always say try not to beat yourself up over things. Like I make mistakes all the time. I just try not to beat myself up when I miss opportunities or I say the wrong thing. I still do those things. So
Yeah, we all do. And I think Maya Angelou says, and I'm going to paraphrase, but when you know better, do better.
Do better. Yep.
And
Yep.
so when we know, we keep moving forward. And I think that is the foundation for the work that we're doing.
Okay. Dr. Leh, it's been fun. I want you to take us home with maybe your final thoughts for today's conversation.
I think it goes back to the idea that social emotional learning is not a program. It is infused into everything we say, we think, and we do. It is who we are. It is in the physical environment around us. It's in how we model and how we interact with everybody, regardless of whether we're at the front of the class or we're walking down the hall or we're at the store. It's in the way that we design and facilitate our instructional practices, our group discussions, the way that we partner people, the reflection time that we give and within the classroom, and it's infused into our curriculum. How can we infuse and have those explicit conversations with students so that they understand that we're helping them develop these skills because we want them to be successful in life, and that we're in that learning path with them.
We're on a learning path with them. Krista, if we have some folks that want to, connect with you, what's the best way to reach you online?
The best way would probably be email. So Krista, Krista, at resonanced.com. If you go to my website, you can also schedule a free 30-minute consultation call. Let's chat. Let's hear what's going on. I am happy to share resources. I've also created, there's a whiteboard animation video. So people who just want to learn what the 5 competencies are, that's there for you. It's a free download. It comes with some slides and also some activities you can do with students or with staff. I'm happy to have a conversation just to learn from anybody. I'm also on social media at resonance_ed on Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook pages.
On it all. You're on all the platforms.
Okay. Still learning it, but I'm on it all.
I just started a TikTok. Oh my God. It's just like another thing I got to learn.
But I like watching other people's TikTok videos.
I'm not on. So, and that's the other thing. I wasn't on TikTok that much. I'm a more of an Instagram person. So I like watching just Instagram reels, but then I started trying to get on TikTok again, and it's in another platform that I got to try to figure out. So,
you know what? You have a son, right? My bonus son is the one who taught me how to get started on Instagram, and my friend Sheila Kennedy. But he would tell me, like, here's how you do things. I'm like, thank you. Just, sometimes we need to let go of our pride and our ego and ask the kids to help us.
Yeah. I agree. Yeah, and I need to. I'm sure he would be happy, and especially my daughter, my little girl. She's all over TikTok as well. So as between the two of them, they could teach me.
You could have a show, the 3 of you.
I should do a live stream with the kids, huh?
Yeah, I think so.
Maybe. They're maybe one day.
In conjunction with the big January event that you're
maybe. Oh, that actually could coincide. I don't know. We'll see. Well. Yes. I'll tell you this, it's always a pleasure. Krista, we've had the opportunity, you've been on the show, you've done some work for me on my coalition, you've live streamed. Like, it's always great to chat with you. Thank you. So thank you so much.
Thank you. This has been amazing. And again, I'm a huge fan and supporter of your work. And so look forward to any future collaborations.
Sounds good. Take care.
Thank you, everybody, for coming.
Krista Leh. Those are the hand claps. Here's the thing. As we wrap up today, I'm going to say this. One, SEL is not a program. Okay. I think bottom line, we can all agree SEL is not a program. It is some strategies that we can utilize as a framework. And there's several different frameworks out there. I got a lot of friends, doing equity work. I got a lot of friends that do social emotional learning strategies. I think it's very beneficial. I wish I knew more about it as well, because I think that's an area that I strongly support. In addition to restorative practices, in addition to positive behavior intervention supports, all these different things, I think are asset-based strategies that are very important. But bottom line, SEL is not it's more than what you might think it is. And even if it's something that you do not have at your school, go on Castle's website. find the information, find those competencies, and you can do things in your classroom tomorrow. Right? Those are things that you can implement tomorrow. You don't have to wait till next school year, next semester. And it's not an add-on. Okay, it's just some of the shifting and some of our language. By the way, can't forget Leading Equity, Becoming an Advocate for All Students, written by, and the Audible version. I forgot to say, this week, the Audible version is currently available. I narrated it. So if you're used to listening to my voice anyway, it makes sense. Might as well grab the book. On Audible version, it's available. Support your boy. If you haven't already, jump on Amazon, write a review. That would be helpful as well. Remember the words of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. You can't fly, then run. You can't run, then walk. If you can't walk, then crawl. But by all means, keep moving. Let's continue to be a voice in leading equity.